I might have it under control.
As long as it doesn't go down up.
It's turned on.
Yeah, so sometimes.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
thank you so much.
Should I wait for a few minutes?
So far, so good.
My students were like, I see this link, I don't know if it works.
No, Nerico came and helped me set it up. Maybe next time I'll do it all by myself.
Well, it's tricky, I gotta say, I have. Then you add all the layers of that.
The rest of it. Well, Eric helped me out too, so. Okay, good evening. I'm Karen Maxim and going to give the second in this series of lectures. To recap, last week I talked about how I got involved with the undocumented workers, how I got connected to Grupo Cajolá, a little bit about the history of Guatemala and how it's driven the poverty and the migration out of Cajolá, and the desire of the group of Cajolá to begin to work in their community of Cajolá. So when I got to Cajolá, I invited the women family members of the guys in Morristown to a meeting, along with some women that I knew from Morristown that had returned already to Cajolá. I invited them to a meeting to just talk about what we might be able to do together in order to work themselves out of poverty. And about 25 women came. And then the next month, about 100 women came. So we planned on meeting when I was in Cajolá. I planned to come for 2 weeks of every month so I could work on the internet center that I was working on with a couple of the guys from Grupo Cajolá, along with continuing to work with them. Since they're mom speakers, I asked Eduardo, who's the founder of the group, I had asked his mother, Juana, if she would translate for me. And she became a really key part of my work there. I also want to say it's very important to understand that all the work that I did in Cajolá, none of it would have been possible if I hadn't come as a member of Eduardo's family. So it's a very hospitable community, but they don't open up to strangers at all. So when people say, wow, you've been able to really have an impact, it's because I came really already as a member of the community. So I never had done anything like this before, but I had heard of something called popular education, and I thought it might work. How many of you have heard of popular education? It's a pedagogy of teaching. I don't know if it's included on many college curricula, but it's based, the popular comes from, it's based on people. It's based on the concrete experiences of the learner. The role of the teacher is to be a facilitator and a collaborator, not impart knowledge. And so it's a very participative process, and the group comes together to create new knowledge. And it's very dangerous because it often leads to action to make changes. So one of the principles of popular education is you begin your session with a dynamic. So I would start each session with, we would get in a circle, we would say our names one by one, then do something, pass a ball around, or say our favorite color, or tell a joke or something. So that's the idea. It's an icebreaker. However, many of the women were super timid, and even saying their name seemed to be difficult, and they often said their name with their hand in front of their face. So I began to think the dynamic wasn't as much an icebreaker as it was something they had to endure in order to get to the rest of the meeting. In the rest of the meeting, we had various activities through the course of the year. We had times where we talked about the history.
I don't know.
Shouldn't be the computer. See it? It's not.
Yeah, but it's still off
This
here.
one's-
You know,
It'll come back on. Thanks. I don't know if it's me, but I'm not destined to work well with this
yeah,
technology.
there's a brown line that goes into the
Okay.
electronics.
Anyway, so we did things like talked about the history of their community. We mapped their community. Here we were making houses out of straws. And so I don't think the women always understood what we were doing, but we were in a process. So every month, more women came. In fact, at one time, I think I was working with about 500 women. Of these women, in the end, we settled into 6 different groups of women. And after we had been working a few months, some women came to me and they said they were sorry, but they had to withdraw from the group because it was too slow. It wasn't going fast enough. And this really surprised me because in my context, like, so what do you have that's an alternative that's faster? Who else is developing here in Cajolá? But then I began to think, and their context wasn't a choice between me and somebody else. Their choice was they're experts at survival. I hadn't produced anything concrete, and so they might as well just be home with their family. So that was a learning for me. A big factor in this feeling on their part is something I will call an NGO syndrome. So very well-intentioned NGOs, they're accustomed to this, will come to their community. They'll have a project like a sink or a sewing machine or something that they need. And in order to qualify for that, you have to attend meetings or you have to do something else. So that was kind of what they were used to. And the NGOs end up having to do this because how they get their funding is for projects that have tangible outcomes and usually in a short amount of time. So the people get things, but nothing really changes in their circumstances. And I had thought I had clearly explained to everybody that I didn't have a project, I didn't have anything in mind. I just wanted to accompany them on a process where they could figure out what they needed to do. I knew when I went to work with them, it wasn't going to be my solution, that the women had to come up with their own solutions. So anyway, apparently with the women that withdrew, that they didn't understand it, or maybe there was too much translation layers. They didn't really get it. So we worked like that for a year. And at the end of the year, each of the groups had their list of what they wanted to do, and they each selected their strategy. Of the groups I was working with, one group chose they wanted to get pilas or sinks. They're big concrete sinks that stand outside their house that they use for washing dishes, washing clothes, washing people, washing dogs, anything. And they didn't have sinks, so that's what they wanted to work on. And the other 5 groups wanted to work on starting a business. So they had to brainstorm what kind of a business that they wanted to start. So all of the 5 groups that weren't choosing sinks chose to do something with chickens. And the group that I had started, when the first 25 women I had invited in the beginning, I went to them. They had chosen chickens with eggs as their business. And I went to them with the idea that were they interested in textiles? Because somebody had said to me in the United States that there could be a market for textiles in the United States. So some of the women agreed. So there I am at the end of the first year. 1 group wants sinks, 5 groups want chickens, and 1 group want textiles. So the sinks. So my idea here was to work out with the women how to write a project, so that we would write a project, collect the data we needed, and look for financing. There's a huge problem with illiteracy in Cajolá. More than 75% of the women in this group didn't know how to read or write or speak in Spanish. But it was when I sent them to get data from the town hall that I realized how strong the discrimination is against women, because they returned from the town hall saying the town official refused to give them any information. So I went with them the next time to get the information, and we got the information. And in another lecture, I'm going to talk a little bit longer about the unintended power I have as a gringa. Anyway, we sat down, we finished the project, and it happened to be a friend of mine from New Jersey was visiting that month, and she took the project for the sinks back to her friends, and they all collected money, and right away we got the money for the sinks. So the sinks were all installed. I said to the women, okay, what are we going to do next? And by that time, I didn't want to do any more one-off projects. I wanted to do something that had to do with earning a living, something that would have consistent income. So they didn't have any ideas what they wanted to do, so I suggested maybe somebody would want to learn how to do sewing. And so some of the women said, yes, let's do that. They started to be trained in how to sew on a pedal sewing machine. And eventually they were entered into the weaving cooperative. So this is when I began to understand a little bit about the gender relations in Cajolá. I can sum up the gender relations in Cajolá with one word, which is machismo. And one of the things that happened along the way is when the egg farm had started, men came to see us and tell us that this was a really bad idea, that the women shouldn't be coming to work. They should be at home taking care of their families. I will say that was around 2008. And when the economy crashed, those same men did return to us and say, wow, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea because the women had some work and were bringing in a little bit of money, and their work, they didn't have any work for a while. The men also intervened in our weaving project. So some men forbade their partners from even participating. One backstrap weaver that we had, when she got married, her husband made her withdraw from the group. And even migrants in the United States could forbid their partners from even participating in the project. So they really did still have a negative impact on what the women can do. And gender violence is a big problem as well. The gender violence doesn't come from the Maya culture. The Maya culture believes that men and women are complementary. But the invasion by the Spanish in the 16th century brought a different way of looking at gender relations, and we still suffer from that in Cajolá. And the saddest thing to me is that in those gender relations, the women, they accept it. Not all women, but many of them feel like they'll just say like, well, it's to be expected. It's just something that you have to put up with. I like to think that the work of the women starting to earn money has improved their self-esteem. And I have observed a few times when a woman in one of the projects has called her partner to account for something and has demanded and received what she needed in the way of behavior. So now we'll talk about the chicken projects. So I know nothing about chicken. Well, I know a lot about chickens now, but at the time I knew nothing about chickens. And so I reached out to another nonprofit in Quetzaltenango that worked with agricultural projects with women. And I asked them for help. And after a long planning process with them, we went to buy the first 200 hens, for our first startup project. When we went to the vendor to buy those 200 hens, he asked us what we were doing, and we told him, and he said, "You're all making a huge mistake. I want you to go see an agronomist." So this brought up another issue of well-intentioned NGOs, is often they're focused on giving you the training because they gave us good training in how to build a chicken house, how to care for the hens, but they don't think about, or they don't talk about the next step, which is how to put that in practice, how to make something commercially viable for it. And so we went to see the agronomist, and he told us that in order to have a profitable egg farm, we needed 2,000 hens. With this group, it was okay. Over time, they got up to 2,000 hens, and it did. So my worry when they wanted to do chickens, I was worried about how are you going to sell these perishable products before they get rotten. But actually, during the course of this process, the problem has been more, our demand is higher than our production. So we always have people asking for eggs and there's not enough eggs. So that was interesting. So we had to go back to the other 4 groups and tell them, okay, now we have to think in terms of 2,000 hens for each group. And they were really overwhelmed. And they decided to abandon the project. They don't want chickens anymore. A part of me was relieved because the starting of a chicken farm, a hen farm, an egg farm was a whole lot harder than I had imagined. So not having to do 4 more actually made me feel a little relieved. However, the very sad thing is when I suggested, okay, we have these, charts of all the other ideas that we evaluated, why don't we go back and see what other idea we can come up with? And nobody wanted to do that. So they just disbanded those groups, which made me sad. So starting the textile business. So now these are the women that split off from from the original group that I worked with. It happens that around that time, I had been invited to participate in a conference of Guatemalan weaving cooperatives. And I learned there that it was very challenging to try to earn a living from backstrap weaving. A backstrap loom is a loom it's the traditional loom of Guatemala and a zillion other countries in the world because it goes back for a long time. It's something that doesn't really need much tools. So the women wear a belt, and then they and the yarn is tied to the belt, and then they tie the end of the yarn on a tree or a hook or somewhere else, and then they weave in front of themselves. It's very beautiful, but it's very time consuming. And if you want to pay the women fair wages, the product is going to be very expensive. So that's when I heard about, in this conference, I heard about the foot loom. So in Guatemala, the foot loom is, the men are the ones who use the foot loom for the weaving. And so not all women do it. The interesting thing is the loom they use is exactly the same loom that came over with the Spanish of the 16th century. So I asked the women, you want to learn to weave on a foot loom? And they readily accepted. So we bought a loom. We found a woman weaver to teach them how to weave, and they started weaving. And that was just the beginning. And next week, I'll tell you about how we started from nothing in our business. That's my spiel. Do you have any questions? I told you everything you wanted to know. Yeah?
So that stayed, did they increase in size? Like the women who had disbanded, when they saw the success, did they join the other 2 groups?
No, actually, we tried to get 2 of the groups to join together for the chicken project so they could combine, but in the end, it didn't work out. So I don't really know. I really don't know why, except they weren't able to overcome the disappointment.
So there were 500 women.
Yeah, over, and one time there were, and then slowly but surely people went out. So in the end, it was probably 30 people per group times 60. So it was still times 6. So it was a lot less, right? But it was a lot of people.
You must have had facilitators.
No, I was the facilitator. Yeah. Yes, with Juana in my pickup truck. That's an adventure.
What did they specifically, or did you guys specifically make style businesses?
Pardon me?
What did you guys specifically make in that textile business?
You're gonna have to come next week and find out, or look on our website, which is Maya Mam Weavier Started.
I'll learn from this.
Well, this whole thing is about how I started them. I just had to start with the background, how I ended up working with them. So from now on, it's weaving. No more chicken. No more things. Just weaving. Well, just the issue. It's the issues that came up. I've been working with.
Used to be no longer work in terms of the egg farm. Is someone else helping them with that, or they're
You know, they got to be, well, that has its own story, but they worked, we worked with that. You want to have the story? We worked with that, and there was about 20 women in that group, and we started, we had our training, we had our chickens, they never had troubles of selling eggs. They learned how to do the eggs. But in the group of these 20 women, I could see there's a third of them got the idea of being their own owners. A third of them were good workers, but they didn't get this business about being responsible. And a third of them were crappy workers. And so we worked and we worked and we worked. And about, I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years into it, we closed it down. They just went, no more chickens, no more hens. And then about 6 months later, that third, that got it, that like understood what we were trying to do, they came and said, could we start again? So I said, yeah, I can raise the money for the chickens. You have to put, this was different, this was a learning on my part. You have to put the money into the feeders and things like that. So they did. And they became a very successful business until 3 months ago, when they got overwhelmed by the cost of feed, and they got overwhelmed, everything just overwhelmed them. So they're on a 6-month sabbatical now. I don't know what's going to happen, but they've been my star story because they worked all on their own. They have to raise, like, I don't know, to feed the chickens for 1 month is about $3,000 or $4,000. So they have to sell enough eggs to raise the money to feed them the next month, and then you have to replace your chickens every 14 months. And so they have to buy new chickens then. And so it's a huge thing. And they did it fantastically. They were my star project. I don't know that they're sabbatical. I don't know. Yeah.
Our professor spoke with us about something about tutoring for the children.
We had a tutoring. That professor. We have had a tutoring program a few times, successful, working on WebEx or Zoom or Google Meet, where the students here tutor the students there. And if you're interested, what would work this year is tutoring in English, because we have a few students learning English, and that would be fun.
How does that work, like, as far as, like,
You have to set up a date and time that works for you, and then you have to show up.
so do I like reach out?
Hmm?
Do I like reach out to someone specifically?
Probably,
Yeah. Okay.
probably your professor.
Are you working with the students or just?
I would be happy to work with anything, but the students we did tutoring came through classes, through Spanish classes. That's how we started. But I'm always open to doing, anybody wants to help me, I always have a million things to do, so I would be, I don't know that I would do tutoring on a one-on-one basis, probably, like, it's too much work to organize it. But, I'd like to do 2 or 3 people with you.
Talk a little bit about popular education. How did you come across it, and how did sort of the ideals of it do in terms of the reality of trying to implement it?
It works fabulously. And how did I know it? It's a very common technique, pedagogy to work with workers, with people. It started with Paulo Freire as a way he was teaching people to read, and so it's used a lot. So I ran into it when I was working with the day workers. I ran into it in a lot. And it's, in a way, so our preschool is Reggio Emilia, right? It's the same idea. It's like working with what people already are and what they're interested in, and then like people come to you already with experiences, and so it's not like starting from scratch. And both of them talk about this collaboration. So the person in the front of the room is collaborating. So our Reggio Emilia teachers are collaborating with the little kids, because the little kids are learning from each other. The teachers can learn from the little kids. So it's all about all of us learning together. So that's where I heard about popular education, and then I read quite a bit and classes in it. And yeah, it works great because it depends on the people, and you are just helping them bring out the things that they are. Well, except for that, my dynamic didn't always work.
First, that sounds like it.
Well, eventually it did, but there was a big cultural. No, over time, a lot of things have changed. So, and, I mean, just that whole reticence of the, I think it's part of their how they deal with things. Like for many years in the weekend class, never would one woman come to see me by herself to ask me a question. They always came in pairs. We want to know this. It's no, but now they come one at a time. So it's, I don't know whether their confidence increased or their confidence in me. But it's just, you can see things happening. Right? Yeah.
Your discovery of literacy when you first went to Cajolá, with the implementation of the internet, and then also with tutoring and the people, how would you say that the literacy rate of adults, especially within something about the kid, have changed?
So over time, there's been, when I think about it, there's been huge change in Cajolá in the 18 years I've been working there. So, but it's not totally by age, but so one of our projects, we have a scholarship program. And those are young people. They could be like studying in high school or studying in college. They might be older than you guys because sometimes they don't start their primary school as early as they might start here. But the scholarship students are people that have like a hope that they can specifically not have to migrate or study, even though they know that there's very little hope for them to get a job, but they're studying as a strategy to avoid that. And because they feel this commitment to their community, and sometimes like they have to write letters a couple times a year, and so they're reading like, so if I can't find a teaching job, at least I can teach people in my community. And so it's not totally age-based because it's also, there's young people who live in the outer areas of Cajolá that still are in this old thing. So still there's parents who don't believe their kids need education. I mean, still there's still a huge illiteracy. But as the younger people are there, and certainly the people that live closer to the center of Cajolá, I see that there's really a big change. And we still, so our other non, I'm talking about reading this is here, but we have a really big commitment in education. We have besides our preschool, we have it's called a learning center now. It started with after school homework, but it's a vibrant place where we have about 90 kids who come 2 hours every afternoon. They're in classes of 10 kids with one teacher, and they have been evaluated for where they are in reading and math, so they know what their skills they need to be working on. But they're also getting reading enrichment, they're writing their own stories, they bring puppet shows in, they bring poets in, and so these kids are getting a much more rich education than anybody had before. And our big project is to build a school for 400 kids that are going to go from preschool through 9th grade. And this is because the public school system in Guatemala is abominable. It's just abominable. Like, we started this program because kids in 6th grade still didn't know how to read. A couple of years, one of the tutoring projects was we had scholarship students in college that hadn't mastered their multiplication tables. I mean, the school system is really bad. So we're trying to offer a better education to kids because that will make a big difference in their lives. Sorry, am I ending this thing? Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about the NGO syndrome. No, so the NGO, you're the NGO, right?
Now I am an MBO, yeah.
But back then it wasn't, so.
I wasn't. The group of Cajolá is.
They started out as well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm always really impressed when you talk about, finding out from them what their idea is. But so many, when I think of NGO, I always think of, well, we're coming in to help these people and we're going to tell them what they need, how they need to do it.
Well, that's another NGO syndrome. I didn't even get to that one.
Well, yeah, so that's interesting. I think that it's really revolutionary, and I can see it's not easy to make that happen. And
well, it's because the rules for NGO, I'm hard on them because they make me crazy. But I understand it's because of the rules that they have to follow. And I never talked about this, but I have to start talking about it a little bit. One thing I had going for me in this is I had a nice savings account. And when I wanted to build a chicken house, I just built it. And so the thing is, NGOs don't have that. So they have, and so if you have to ask for a project, it takes a year or more. So if I had all these women that are anxious to start their chickens and we have to wait a year, that's the end of that. So it's part of my secret. It's that I was able to do something when it needed to be done. So but the NGO thing, I think they're designed so that changes don't happen. So, but the way they're run and the whole corporatization of NGOs, it's like nothing happens in, you make social change in a quarter. You can make it in a year. They've been doing this for 18 years. And we're making a difference. We're making changes. We're making big changes. But it didn't happen overnight. And so that's the tragedy. So an NGO could be well-meaning and well-intentioned, but they don't get funding.
no, so is Grupo Cajolá, and you were,
There's Grupo Cajolá in Cajolá. It's a Guatemalan nonprofit association. And now there's Grupo Cajolá in North America, and we are also a nonprofit association.
so how would you compare processes and working with those different?
It's totally different. The rules are totally different. It's two different animals.
Background in business because I just taxes or
I don't do taxes.
Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right. There's the one thing about you.
Oh.
Right, the one fact thing.
I don't do taxes. Well, I do taxes for undocumented workers in Russia, but I don't do any other taxes. Okay, so next week I'm gonna talk about the nitty gritty about starting from zero.
And thanks for my technical help. And the computer stayed, that's good. Oh, stop, I want to stop the WebEx.